And next up, we have Ian Whitney from ASR who's going to talk about people over processes. Ian, I'll give the floor to you.
Great. Everyone should be able to see my screen and hear me. I'll leave a couple seconds here to have people shout technical problems at me. Good. I can't see the chat, so if anything's going on in there, it is hidden from me. So I'm going to talk today, give a little talk called People Over Process and Feelings Over Hype. I'm Ian Whitney, the manager of the Custom Solutions team within Academic Support Resources, which is part of the Office of Undergrad Education. This talk was originally longer, and then I started writing it, and I realized it was full of terrible hot takes. And so I took out all the hot takes, which made the talk very short. It also made it better, hopefully, because who needs hot takes? And but as a result, you'll probably get some time back. So let's get started. Okay. First off, I want to talk a little bit about therapy. And first, I'm really going to talk about therapy as we see it in media most of the time. It always starts off with, someone has a problem. They go to their therapist and they say, I have a problem. And then usually what happens is the therapist has some sort of wise insight that they offer. And then the patient says, cool, you've totally solved my problems, doctor, thanks. And off they go. And that's a great idea. It's very much a process. And if your definition of a process is something where you really have expected inputs, steps that you follow, and an expected output. And there's not a lot of variation. You turn these gears, you're always going to get the same result. I have not found that's the way that therapy works for me. Typically, what happens is I say I have a problem, and the therapist says, interesting. Let's talk about that. And then a significant amount of time passes, months or years, and then I say, well, I feel slightly better about that, but now I'm really tired, and I also have new problems. And then that cycle repeats forever, at least, so far. Maybe someday it'll stop. And that's not a process, right? There's unexpected inputs, there's unexpected outputs, there's no clear endpoint, and there's no real clear steps to follow. I really think of therapy more as a wall of Japanese gachapon machines in which you put in your money and some unexpected toy comes out, and you never really know what you're going to get, and it's almost never the toy you wanted, but sometimes it's a toy you like. The thing to keep in mind here as we talk through this is that we are very lazy, people in general, and we find that process is very easy to think about, and that people are hard. People being unexpected inputs and unexpected outputs, that wall of gachapon machines, and processes being the gears, we're really always going to prefer the gears when it comes to deciding how we're going to do our work. About 20 years ago, some people, 17 white dudes at a ski resort in Utah, had pretty much the same realization. They had worked in the software industry for a long time, and they'd been given a lot of processes of various heavyweight ways of doing their job, where they were treated pretty much like gears. The idea was, well, we give you this very thoroughly defined set of requirements, and you are just the gears that turn, and then out pops working software. And they said, no, that's clearly not working. And they signed what is known as the Agile Manifesto. The very first line of the Agile Manifesto of the things that they value is that they value individuals over interactions, over processes and tools. So what they're really saying here is that instead of processes, which is what they've been given, which didn't work, they really valued the unexpected inputs and unexpected outputs that you get from a wall of gachapon machines. That people really is programming, and programming is people. There's no strict process that you can follow. But remember, we are lazy. Process is easy and people are hard. So one of the things that really came out of the Agile Manifesto was programming in 2005 was, hey, let's do exactly what those 12 white guys who were hunkered down in an expensive ski lodge were doing. Not a lot of thought about necessarily the intent behind what they were saying, but very much focused on their process. And as a result, this was the state of programming in pretty much 2005 in a lot of places. A programmer would say, well, I've got a problem that I need to work on. And the wise sage would just whisper, extreme programming. And off they would go, all my problems were solved. Extreme programming was a collection of books and processes that came out of, I think it was 2 of the original developers that worked on the Agile Manifesto from a product team that they worked on within the Chrysler Corporation. And the Chrysler Corporation had its own set of problems, its own set of people, and its own set of constraints. And extreme programming came out of solving those particular set of problems, right? Unexpected inputs and unexpected outputs. It wasn't a process that you could just apply everywhere. It was a wall of gachapon machines, and the extreme programming was what came out of that. So what people found with extreme programming was that it was a great idea, and they really liked the idea, but it just didn't work for them all the time. And surely we've learned this lesson by now. You can't just take some process that was developed somewhere else and use it to solve your problems. Processes don't work like that. So we come up to the state of programming today, remembering that we are still lazy. And the programmer says, well, I have a problem. And the extreme sage will say something like Kubernetes, or Scrum, or chaos engineering, or observability. And the programmer says, cool, hey, great, thanks, you solved all my problems. And they go off and they implement that process or that tool, and oh my gosh, everything's great. And that doesn't work, right? All of these tools are really presented as a solution to a problem or a process that solves a problem. But we have to keep in mind that that problem isn't our problems. So I'm humbly adding this idea to the idea of the Agile Manifesto, which is that we should trust our feelings over hype. I want to go back, if we look at Kubernetes and Scrum and chaos engineering and observability and anything else that we might see on Hacker News, they're all good tools, and they definitely solve problems that exist in the world. Take observability, for example. I started thinking about this at the Code Freeze talk that we had back when we were allowed to see other people in January, I think that was. And Charity Majors was talking about observability. And very clearly said what kind of problems observability is meant to solve. And it's for large-scale, widely distributed microservice architectures in which problems that might happen in once every million cases or billion cases or trillion cases start happening often enough because of the scale at which you're operating. And you need a way to be able to observe those problems and debug them from an operational point of view. And observability tools are designed to solve that sort of problem. So if you're thinking of like the target engineers that were at Code Freeze and the sorts of problems that they deal with, observability seems like a great process for them, right? Their problems are similar. But for an application that I have that has 20 users that use it 1 month out of the year, observability might not be the solution to my problems. The same is true with chaos engineering. Comes out of Netflix. Chaos Monkey is like kind of the canonical tool that people use for this stuff, although there's a whole suite of them. Really designed for microservice, highly distributed architecture in which there's so much complexity that you kind of have to introduce tooling that makes things randomly fail so that you know that your application can stand up to everything. I don't really have any applications like that. Scrum. I'm going to give Scrum some slack here, right? The way Scrum presents itself is Scrum says it is a framework that you are meant to not just adopt as a set of practices or a process, but that you are supposed to manipulate and modify to meet your own situations. I personally have never seen anyone actually do that with Scrum, right? Usually people take on Scrum and they say, well, cool, we've got the Scrum process and we're doing this. And so you're the product owner and you're the Scrum master and we're going to have all these exact meetings. And Scrum solves certain problems. It came out of the Agile Manifesto as well. But take it on as a strict process where you just adopt it whole cloth, it might not solve your problems. And I don't actually understand what Kubernetes is, so I don't know what problems it solves. So let's just get past that one. So if we think of this as feelings over hype, and keeping in mind that these are all good tools, we do have to ask ourselves, are they good for you? For your random set of inputs and your random set of outputs, are they going to be the right thing for you? Or are you adopting them because the wise sage said that Kubernetes was the solution to all of your problems? You have to keep in mind that your problems are different, your team is different, and your solutions will necessarily be different. So I think you can ask yourself these questions. What pain does this tool solve? Like I said, with chaos engineering, right? It solves the pain of a widely distributed microservice architecture in which you don't have necessarily full control over all of the things. Maybe there's just some network latency or some service that you rely on goes down. You need to have some tool that forces you to think about those things. You have definite pain there, and that tool helps you solve it. But then you have to ask your question, do I feel that pain? Am I interested in this from a tool of hype, or am I interested in this because I have the feelings of that pain? And like I said, with chaos engineering, I don't most of the time. I definitely do have network latency problems, or sometimes Isilon goes down or things like that. So I do feel that sort of pain, but not any sort of scale that Netflix does. And then I think there's the second question of what resources does this tool require? What sort of inputs do I need to make this tool provide the outputs I want? And then an honest question about, do I have those resources? Right. Using chaos engineering as an example again, one of the things that it does is you have this tool like a chaos monkey, which might randomly introduce network latency. Now, in the case of Netflix, where they kind of control all of that infrastructure, they can introduce that idea and not really have any sort of problems. Chaos Monkey is not going to start messing up everyone else's life. But if I were to take something like Chaos Monkey and introduce it to the University of Minnesota architecture and networking, people would get real mad at me, right? I don't have the resources to just randomly slow down the network at the University of Minnesota. So maybe that's not the right tool for me. And then I think you really have to take the same process that you take, or I've taken, at least with therapy. You adopt an idea, you iterate on it, and then you ask yourself, do I feel that this is still a good solution? Is this providing the outputs that I want? Or am I still just trying to hammer this peg into a square-shaped hole? And then abandon, if that's the case. Honestly ask yourself how you and your team are feeling about this approach. And then you repeat. And just like with therapy, you probably do that forever, or until you retire, if we ever get to retire. That's my talk. The whole thing is at that URL. It's PDF if you want to share it with anyone. It's also got the slide text file, which you can look at in DexSet. It's mostly readable Markdown, but DexSet has some weird formatting stuff in there. You can always find me on Slack, or you can find me on email. And then if there are any questions.
No questions in the chat. Does anybody want to chime in with a question? Hearing none.
This is Tono. I really love this talk. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks.
We were embarking on a bigger project, and before starting our work, we thought that it would be a good idea to reach out to our units, our people who have stackled projects of similar size and scope. And when trying to think of how we would reach out to these people, it occurred to me that I don't quite know what to even ask for. Our circumstances may be specific to us, or what we know is maybe different from what other people know. And how can we present our questions in such a way that other people would find something that they can contribute to? So I wonder if you might have some advice to this. How do you ask for help?
Okay, so people are hard. Honestly, my advice here is useless. It is It is being honest about the pain you're feeling in a public place and hoping that someone connects with you. And it is then building those relationships with those people over time and having conversations with them. Then that's not helpful advice, I realize. It requires time and effort and might not ever get you anything. If there was, other than conversations, I can't think of anything good, because the problems that even within the university that we deal with can be very unique to our department or this one faculty member, and it can be very hard to generalize that pain out to a point where someone else can then say, "Oh, I had similar pain and I dealt with it in this way." Tech people Slack is the most valuable tool we have in this, I think, because, and meetings like this, because it's the one place where we come together and say like, "Oh, let me tell you about this shit I'm dealing with." And people can empathize and connect with you about it.
I think one thing that can be useful in that case, if you have the opportunity, there's not a lot of other people in the university who have identity management problems, but every other university has those same problems. And so being able to connect with peers at other institutions is usually a good way to get some kind of a reality check is not the right word I want to use here, but at least, you know, to kind of compare what other approaches people have taken, you know, learn from their experiences where you can. And one thing that I find that's really nice about that approach is that you can realize that we're not the best at this, but we're not the worst. There's people with way worse problems than we do.
I think that's a really great point. It reminds me of, I just finished, or I'm finishing up right now, working with some CSOM students on their senior capstone project. And the project we ended up giving them was help us figure out how to involve students in the agile development process. And one of the tasks I gave these teams was to go find out what other universities are doing and how they're bringing students into this process. And I also had them talk to some other departments on the university campus that I know are doing some good work in that place, like libraries. And that was the first time where I really thought of like, oh, hey, I don't know why, I've been at the for 7 years. And that was the first time I ever really thought of like, there are other universities, they probably also have similar problems. And I'm really looking forward to finding out what the students learned there.
We have a couple things in the chat. Ian, can you speak to how you've used these ideas with your team and how you ensured that you were keeping people over process?
One of the interesting things about my team and helping kind of manage a team that I've learned is that there's very little you can do as a manager, and everything takes a really long time. Especially to you, right? Like you don't really necessarily have a lot of power to just be like, oh, all right, we're all gonna do this now. And I'm just not that, it's just not my style anyways. So probably in whatever, the 2 or 3 years I've been a manager of the team, the most useful thing I ever did was introduce weekly retrospectives. And some team members are on this call, so don't take this the wrong way. We were really bad at weekly retrospectives for a while. And I didn't stop them. I kept them going. And after we kind of did weekly retrospectives and all of us kind of saw the value of bringing things to that weekly meeting and saw that in some cases, not all, but in some cases, we were really able to make positive change based upon the pain we brought to that meeting, weekly retrospectives got a lot better. And that is an agile process, right? That comes out of XP or Scrum or lowercase agile, or someone came up with it at some point, I don't know who. But we didn't do it for a long time, and we introduced it, we stuck with it. And that's the best thing I've done. One-on-ones with the whole team every week is also really good. They can give you their individual pain that they might not bring to a group meeting. But I think retrospectives have been the biggest player in that space. And the rest of my team can say if they have other opinions on that.
Another thing from the chat, just an FYI, the Z-Link is bringing up a 404, so maybe if
What?
you could post something in Slack later.
I will fix the Z-Link.
All right.
I checked it last night and it was working, but I'm wondering if something weird happened there. I'll double check.
And I think just scanning through the chat, that's all I see in feedback or questions. Would anybody else like to chime in with a question?
Oh yeah, my GitHub repo is probably not public like Colin said. I thought I'd set that to public by default. I will fix that. Thanks.
Okay, not seeing or hearing other questions. Thanks, Ian, for the talk. It was really great.
Thank you. Thanks for managing to get code people online.
Yeah. So far, so good.